Jumping back now into the action here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss a big move that we saw over here on the eastern side of the country here with the New York Giants, talking about the quarterback. Daniel Jones is out as the starting quarterback for the Giants, and now they officially move over to Tommy DeVito. Head coach Brian Daboll made it official during a video conference yesterday, what had been sort of foreshadowed last week when the Giants were on their bye week. Brian Daboll still spoke to the media, and they obviously asked him questions about any potential changes coming, or specifically what they're going to do with Daniel Jones, if he's going to continue being the starter. And I mentioned it last week, whenever you hear a general manager or a head coach or anybody being asked these questions and they respond with, "We're going to evaluate everything. Everything is on the table." They might as well say that they're going to change something. It happened this time around. It happened with the Chicago Bears. Doug Peterson mentioned it, coming off of that embarrassing loss to the Lions. So maybe he might be out of a job or something else might change in the Jaguars organization. But yeah, I mean, this was, for some people, a long time coming. I don't think anyone's too surprised by it. And their general manager also, Joe Shane, also talked about it last week, and how he wanted to emphasize that any change that they do make is, football related. It's not so much, like many speculate, around the contract and avoiding that injury guarantee part of the contract in Daniel Jones's contract, about how if he gets hurt at any point this year, his salary next year is guaranteed. So as long as they, as much as they don't want to admit it, that's something that the Giants obviously don't want to do. So to avoid that, they go to Tommy DeVito. Again, even if they deny it all they want, it's a business decision, right, that the organization has to make. So they indeed go ahead and bench Daniel Jones and are rolling with Tommy DeVito in his second year in the NFL. Daniel Jones was not only benched, but will serve as the emergency quarterback number 3. Andrew Luck will remain as the backup quarterback, which kind of ruffled some feathers. I think some people that I saw react to this piece of news said that, they wanted to see Drew Lock start, and some people weren't too particularly happy that Tommy DeVito was starting, and just going at the Giants even more, which I guess it's valid, but I don't really mind it too much, just because it's not like the Giants are trying to genuinely create a spark to try and make the playoffs or something. It's irrelevant at this point. Maybe not for them long term, if you really want to bring into the conversation about how players coming in as free agents might, be affected and put off by something like this. I don't really put too much thought into that. Thinking short term, I don't think the Giants were really considering too much whether starting Tommy or starting Drew Lock was going to make that big of a difference. So I don't really mind them going to Tommy DeVito. I mean, he played last year as well. He made 9 appearances, 6 starts, and he threw for over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. So he's going to play his first upcoming game this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, Brian Daboll mentioned that as one of the reasons that he went with Tommy DeVito, to provide that similar sort of spark that the team had last year with him as the quarterback. And I mean, just that's the part of the news that it's current. It's what's going to happen in just a week's time, right? Tommy DeVito we're going to see Tommy DeVito out there as the quarterback. But now it's inevitable that we talk about the Giants in the overall picture of what we've seen in this Daniel Jones era, because it looks like it's coming to an end, obviously. Him not playing and his salary not being guaranteed, all but just guarantees that he will be off of the Giants come this offseason. For whatever reason, I don't understand them, doing this and not moving on from him. It makes no sense for him to stay on the roster, so I anticipate the Giants moving away from him once the season is over. But looking back on what, looks to be the end of the Daniel Jones era in New York, he finishes potentially with a 24-44-1 record as the Giants quarterback. And through that time, the Giants have been as unstable as you could even imagine, because in that time, they've gone through 2 general managers, 3 head coaches, 4 offensive coordinators in the 6 years with the New York Giants to try and validate and try and get this thing to work ever since they drafted Daniel Jones back in 2019. And after a terrible time, with Pat Shurmur and Joe Judge as the head coaches, they didn't really last that long in New York. Daniel Jones finally impressed in his first season with Brian Daboll, obviously back in 2022. So much so that they offered him that ridiculous contract, 4 years, $160 million ahead of the 2023 season, which obviously now in hindsight, looking back on it, definitely seems premature. Maybe you thought at the time that it was also premature, but now certainly it looks like the wrong decision was made with that contract. And following that decision to offer Daniel Jones that money, that contract, it led to the Giants franchise tagging Saquon Barkley last year, and all of that, paying Daniel Jones and not paying their real superstar Saquon Barkley, all that led to was Daniel Jones hurting his neck first early in the season, then finishing his season completely when he tore his ACL. He only played 5 games yesterday in the first year of that contract, basically, and already the initial look of that doesn't look great because you paid him all that money and he's not even playing the first year. Obviously you don't want him to get hurt. That's not what we're saying, but it just adds more fire to this whole situation about, the contract and it just really not working out from the start. Then, with Saquon Barkley getting tagged last offseason, then we get to this offseason and the discussions with Saquon about having a potential, contract extension. What were the Giants going to offer him? Were they going to be able to afford both of them after they gave Daniel Jones that money before they gave it to Saquon? Then, we all saw how it all kind of finalized this offseason when we saw it on Hard Knocks and the Giants ultimately letting Saquon Barkley just walk out the door for nothing. And that already is insane to think about, but also the fact that not only did they let Saquon leave this offseason, but it's the combination of that and all the reports, all the things that we saw about the Giants trying to draft a quarterback a year after, an offseason after they had paid Daniel Jones those $40 million per year. So already they're having second thoughts about it. The actions speak louder than what they were saying at the time, because at the time, they were asked about it, and they'd always say that Daniel Jones is their starter. He's going to be the starter going forward, but it doesn't erase the fact that there were reports that the Giants were trying to trade up for a Drake May, potentially for even Jaden Daniels. So if he's your starter and you really believe in him, there's no reason to even entertain those talks. But the Giants went ahead and did so, and extensively at that, and it just confirms their lack of confidence in Daniel Jones, despite them trying to avoid admitting to their mistake by continuing to back him as their starter. And not only that, paying Jones after one better year was a mistake. It's not even like he had a great year. I know they made the playoffs. There was no real expectations with them going into that year, and I think that's more so to do with Brian Daboll and the job that he did, rather than paying Daniel Jones the money that they ultimately gave him. But I'm definitely one of the people that think that decision to pay Daniel Jones, now looking back on it now, after 6 years with the Giants, was certainly premature, was a panic decision in my opinion, especially when you have Saquon Barkley sitting there, and undoubtedly comparing both of them, Daniel Jones, being the quarterback, had such a stronghold over the Giants that I think is pretty unfair and pretty ridiculous, honestly. The way that they paid Daniel Jones, along with the way that they treated Saquon, just like any other ordinary running back, and they offered him, I forget the exact amount, but it wasn't met with Saquon as the contract that he wanted. So the fact that they felt like they could just move on from Saquon and, be all right and, just sign Devin Singletary like it wasn't going to make a huge difference, that is also so egregious. And, the decision-making and thinking that goes into that is insane. And we talked extensively about it when the Hard Knocks episodes came out and we saw how the discussions went about. And, again, I just feel like the Giants in this situation were so panicked by the idea that we got to pay our quarterback, we got to pay him now, we got to pay him $40 million because then the market is going to be even more expensive. Let's just pay him now because he's a quarterback. We don't want to be in a situation where we overpay for him, so let's just go ahead and pay him now. That thinking of just being so focused on having any sort of quarterback in there to try and avoid, paying more for him, or the idea that you're going to have to find another quarterback. They were already doing that, so I don't understand why there was such an urgency to pay Daniel Jones. Again, after a 2022 season that, even if you want to consider it good, it's only 1 year. So to pay him $40 million after one solid year makes no real sense to me. And also the Giants weren't, in a situation where this team was completely filled up of players that there was no holes in this roster. There was a ton of holes in this roster after 2022, and still they paid the quarterback, which we've seen it all work out with these young quarterbacks, right? For as much as you want to draft a quarterback, the pieces that you have around him, if they don't work, it doesn't matter how much you pay that quarterback, how high you drafted him. It really is irrelevant. So for them to pay him that much with having all the holes in their roster and losing a piece like Saquon Barkley was sickening. It's despicable, especially the fact that he joined the Eagles is just adding like the ultimate just insult to injury for the Giants. And now, looking over this and, this panic decision by the Giants to pay Daniel Jones at the time, and now it looks like they're going to move on from him after, realizing that they made a mistake. And it's going to be a huge mistake. I think it's going to go down as one of the most just blunderous decisions for an organization. And now the Giants are going to not restart completely because they do have some good players, but now they're going to be in the same situation looking for quarterbacks, and considering the spot that they're in right now in terms of the draft, of course, they want to get guys like Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, and those names, but I don't know if they're going to be like top 2, top 3 kind of a position in the draft where they can get maybe one of these guys, and I don't know exactly how the board will fall, obviously, but I'm assuming these guys are going to go no later than top 4 or 5, and I just don't know, considering how many bad teams they are in the NFL. The Jaguars are down there, the Raiders are down there, the Jets are down there as well. How everything's going to pan out, and I feel like the Giants aren't even in a great position to get one of those guys. So what do you do if you don't get, a Cam Ward or a Shedeur Sanders? Do you try and, it's not, I don't like calling it a reach because, like, Quinn Ewers is one of the better quarterbacks in this draft, but from what I've read, from what everybody reacts to in terms of their opinions of this year's quarterback class in the draft, they would say it's not as good, obviously, as this one that we just had. So do you want to take a guy in the first round that not many people are high on, or that just maybe doesn't live up to the bill? You just did that with Daniel Jones, so are you going to do that again? And then maybe you go into free agency, but who do you even bring in at that point? Is it going to be someone that's going to elevate the level of play that much more? This is looking like a multiple season kind of thing for the Giants. Of course, unless they can get a guy like Shedeur and Cam Ward, but I feel like that's even going to cost them even more than it would have this year, right? Because now they don't really even have a quarterback, whereas before, if they would have drafted one and, admittedly came to the fact that they made a mistake with Daniel Jones, then maybe they could have had him for a year, moved on from him after this year, and they would have at least had a quarterback. But they it all just didn't work out like that. And, this is where we are now. The Giants still trying to figure everything out. I don't think they're going to move on from Brian Dable or Joe Shane, which is a positive, I guess, because you don't have to find new, front office members in that regard. But the quarterback now, where they felt so short about it a year ago, has completely just backfired on them, and now they're without one of their best players in the history of that franchise. So it's just nuts to talk about how this is actually an actual thing that happened for them to just let Saquon walk out the door. But yeah, it all has just led to Tommy DeVito starting again this year. So we'll see how he performs now for the rest of 2024. But on that note about questionable decisions by organizations, we're going to talk about now going back to the reaction to the games in Week 11, the Chicago Bears, more questionable decisions coming from them, and specifically their head coach Matt Eberflus. Even though Caleb Williams played better, they still lost the game to the Green Bay Packers. So we're going to react to it, talk about what happened, and that questionable decision there at the end of the game. So we'll be right back with that game and our reactions in just a few moments.
Looking for